The dog stopped, planted all four paws in the dirt, and refused to move. And the whole team laughed. 30 seconds later, rockets were tearing through canyon walls, men were bleeding out in the dust, and the only person standing between 12 elite operators and total annihilation was the woman they'd spent the entire morning mocking. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't supposed to be that. But she was. And what she did next would change every protocol, every assumption, and every arrogant soldier who thought they already knew everything worth knowing. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe right now. Drop your city and country in the comments so I can see exactly how far this story has traveled. Hit that like button and stay with me until the very last second. Because what happens at the end of this story? Nobody sees coming. The cold came early that morning. It rolled off the ridge in waves, thick and metallic, carrying the kind of dry chill that gets behind your eyes and sits there. Fort Blackstone's main compound was already alive before 0430. Generators humming, truck engines growling to life in the motor pool, boots scraping across gravel in the dark. But the briefing room at the eastern edge of the TOC was quieter than the rest of the base, and colder. The fluorescent light inside casting everything in that flat, institutional white that makes faces look like they haven't slept in 3 days. Most of them hadn't. 12 men sat around a battered folding table covered in aerial photographs and laminated topographic maps. Their gear was already staged by the door: plate carriers, helmets, rifles, and the kind of beat-up equipment that comes from actual use rather than a supply room shelf. These weren't garrison soldiers. Every man in that room wore the particular expression of someone who had been in enough bad situations to stop flinching at the word danger and start asking what kind. Captain Nathan Hale stood at the head of the table. He was built the way career military men get built, not from a gym, but from years of carrying weight across bad terrain. Mid-40s, short-cropped hair going gray at the temples, a jaw that looked like it had been set in concrete sometime around his third deployment and never quite loosened since. He had the quiet authority of a man who had earned his rank in places where rank meant nothing, and he wore it the same way, without thinking about it. "All right," he said, tapping the map with 2 fingers. "Patrol route is confirmed. We move through the main valley approach, sweep the northern tree line, push to the ridge observation point, and extract by 0900. Intel says the area has been quiet for 6 days. We're not expecting contact." He paused. "We never expect contact." A few dry laughs. The kind that aren't really laughs, just exhales that have learned to sound like them. Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb, seated to Hale's left, leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "What's the ROE look like if we do find something?" "Standard. Positive ID before engagement. We're there to observe and report, not to start a war." Hale rolled the map and slid it into a tube. "Questions?" Nobody had questions. That was the way of it. Briefings at 0430 weren't for questions. They were for confirmation. Everyone already knew their job. The real conversation happened in the field. What nobody mentioned, not openly anyway, was the 13th person assigned to the mission. Erin Cross was already outside. She stood near the vehicle staging area with Viper sitting perfectly still beside her left knee, both of them facing the darkness beyond the compound fence like they were reading something written in it. She was average height, lean, with the kind of stillness that tends to make people uncomfortable without knowing why. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her gear was simple, minimal, nothing decorative. A plate carrier stripped of everything non-essential, a sidearm, a medical bag that sat heavier than it looked. Viper was a Belgian Malinois, 4 years old, 70 pounds of muscle and intent. His coat was the color of sand and shadow, and he had amber eyes that moved constantly, cataloging everything in his immediate environment with the methodical patience of something that had been built for exactly this purpose. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't excited. He was simply on, the way a switch stays on. Staff Sergeant Derek Colton was the first one out of the briefing room, and he noticed her standing there the way you notice something that doesn't quite belong, a brief double take, a slight recalibration of his expression, and then the dismissal that follows. "Handler's already out here," he announced to no one in particular, loud enough to carry back through the door. "Of course she is." Webb stepped out behind him, pulling on his helmet. "Probably letting the dog pee on our trucks." Colton snorted. What are we even running a K-9 element for on a simple observation patrol? Ask higher, not my call. Neither of them addressed Erin directly. She didn't react, just kept her eyes forward, one hand resting loosely on Viper's harness. The convoy moved out at 0500. 3 vehicles, lights off, moving along a dirt track that had been worn into the hillside by decades of use and neglect. Erin rode in the second vehicle, Viper positioned between her boots on the floor, his head up, ears rotating like small satellite dishes. The men in the vehicle with her sat with their bodies angled slightly away. Not dramatically, not obviously, just enough. Sergeant Ripper Santos was the talker of the group. Most units had one, the guy who fills silence because silence makes him uncomfortable. He had a broad face, a perpetual stubble that never quite became a beard, and a habit of making observations disguised as jokes. "So," Santos said, looking at Erin with the particular expression of someone who thinks they're being charming, "does the dog do any actual military stuff, or is this more of a morale thing?" "He does his job," Erin said. Right. What's his job exactly? Bark if he smells bad guys?" "Detection, tracking, apprehension. He can also locate tripwires and command detonated device." "Huh." Santos looked at Viper, unimpressed. "My cousin had a German shepherd that could open the refrigerator." "Good for him," Erin said. Someone else in the vehicle laughed. Not with her, around her, the way people laugh when they've decided the joke is at someone else's expense and they're safe from it. She let it go. She was good at letting things go. The vehicle stopped at the valley mouth at 0517. From there, it was boots on ground, single file, noise discipline, Hale up front with Webb just behind him, and the rest of the team fanned into a loose patrol formation. Erin and Viper were placed near the rear of the column, which was tactically standard for a K-9 element on an observation mission, and also, she understood perfectly well, a way of keeping her out of the way. The valley was narrow, flanked by rock walls that rose 30 feet on either side before flattening into scrub-covered ridges. The floor was hard-packed earth and loose stones, cut through the middle by a dry stream bed that rattled quietly when boots crossed it. Dawn was still 20 minutes away. The sky above the ridges had gone from black to the particular dark blue that comes just before color starts returning to the world. Viper's behavior changed at the 800-meter mark. It was subtle at first, a slight stiffening of his posture, his nose dropping closer to the ground, then lifting again, working the air. His ears went rigid, not rotating anymore, just locked forward. Erin felt it through the leash before she saw it. She slowed her pace. "Viper." Her voice was barely a breath. He glanced up at her, then back ahead. His tail had gone still. She keyed her radio quietly. "Element lead. This is Cross." Viper showing interest ahead, requesting a pause. A 3-second silence. Then Hale's voice, flat and controlled. "What kind of interest?" "Alert posture. Could be nothing. Could be something." "Define something." "I'd rather pause and work him through it first." Another silence, longer this time. "We're on a timeline, Cross. Keep moving." She kept moving. But she watched Viper, and Viper's entire body was telling her something she had learned a long time ago not to ignore. The second alert came at the 950-meter mark. This time, Viper stopped completely. He planted himself in the stream bed, paws braced against the rocks, and refused to take another step forward. His head was down low, chin nearly parallel with the ground, and he was doing the thing that always made Erin's chest tighten, that sustained directional stare at a fixed point about 40 meters ahead, where the canyon floor began to curve slightly rightward. The team's forward momentum stalled like a chain snapping. "What's the holdup?" Webb's voice back down the line. Santos turned to look at Erin. "Seriously? The dog's stopping us?" "He's alerting," Erin said. Her voice was still quiet, but the quality of it had changed. "I need everyone to stop moving." "For a dog?" "For an alert." "Yes." Colton stepped closer. "Handler, we have got about 15 guys standing in the open right now because your animal decided to take a personal day. Move him forward or move him out." "I'm not moving him forward." She met Colton's eyes and held them. "He doesn't give false ambush alerts. I've worked with him for 2 years. He has never once. Cross. Hale's voice cut through the channel. What is the alert behavior indicating specifically? She paused for exactly 1 second. The posture is consistent with a buried or concealed threat, possibly command detonated, possibly tripwire. I need to work him off leash for 60 seconds to... Negative. We're not doing a 60-second obstacle course in the middle of a patrol window. Reroute around the dog's concern and keep moving. Captain, that's an order, Cross. Move. She looked at Viper. He was still locked onto that curve in the canyon, motionless and absolutely certain. She looked up at the ridgeline on the right side. Something caught her eye. Not movement, exactly. More like the absence of it. A shape that was too regular. A shadow that didn't move with the wind like the scrub around it did. She keyed her radio one more time. There's a position on the right ridgeline, she said. 11 o'clock from the curve, the silhouette at the top of the eastern rock shelf. Cross, I'm going to say this once more. Hale's voice had dropped half a register. Stop. Talking. And move. Logan Pierce had been listening. He was the team's long gun, a sniper with 6 years in the role and the kind of patience that only comes from spending entire days behind a scope waiting for a moment that lasts less than a second. He was quiet in the way that snipers tend to be quiet, not from shyness, but from a professional habit of observation over participation. He had been watching Erin from the moment they left the vehicles, not the way Santos watched her, with that performative dismissiveness that was really just a kind of nervousness. Pierce watched her the way he watched everything, as data, the way she moved, the economy of it, the way her eyes swept terrain in overlapping arcs, left near, left far, right near, right far, center, the same systematic pattern they'd been taught in advanced reconnaissance training. The way she'd flagged the streambed crossing 40 meters back as a potential choke point without saying a word, just adjusted Viper's position slightly and increased her scan rate. He'd noticed the medical bag, too. It wasn't a standard K-9 handler's medical kit. It was heavier, more organized, with external pouches in configurations he recognized from a different kind of training entirely. He'd said nothing. It wasn't his place to say something. But when she flagged the ridgeline position, he pulled his rifle and glassed it. He stared through the scope for 5 seconds. Then he let out a breath that was very carefully controlled. There was something up there. Not a person, or not a visible person. But the rock shelf she'd pointed at had a slight depression behind it that was too uniform, and the scrub along the top edge was arranged in a pattern that didn't quite follow the natural growth line. It was good concealment, very good, but not perfect. He lowered his rifle. He thought about saying something. The column started moving again. At the 970-meter mark, Webb's boot found the wire. He didn't see it. Nobody did. It was monofilament, gossamer thin, strung 6 inches above the streambed between 2 rocks that looked indistinguishable from the 50 other rocks around them. His boot caught it, didn't break it immediately, dragged it forward half a step, stretched it. And in the fraction of a second between the resistance and the release, Erin grabbed the back of Webb's plate carrier with both hands and yanked him sideways with a force that had nothing to do with her size. The wire snapped. For 1 full second, nothing happened. Then the world came apart. The first rocket hit the left canyon wall 30 meters ahead, a thunderclap of orange and gray that sent a shockwave rolling back down the streambed like a physical punch. The second hit the right wall almost simultaneously, and the noise became something beyond sound. It became pressure, vibration in the chest cavity, a ringing that replaced everything else. Rock fragments and dust cascaded down in sheets. The gunfire started before the echo of the first explosion had finished. 3 directions. Disciplined, overlapping fire from elevated positions, the left ridge, the right ridge, and directly ahead at the curve where Viper had locked his stare 12 minutes ago. It wasn't spray and pray. The fire was controlled, accurate, and it was cutting the column apart. Hale went down in the first 4 seconds. He'd been 15 meters ahead when the first rocket hit, and the concussive wave caught him sideways and put him on the ground. He tried to get up, made it halfway, and dropped again. His left leg wasn't working. 3 other operators were down or pinned. Santos had made it behind a boulder, but he was bleeding from somewhere on his right arm, and his rifle was on the wrong side of 6 feet of open ground. Colton was flat on the stream bed, trying to return fire from a position that offered almost no actual cover. And Viper was still sitting, perfectly still, in the chaos, in the noise, in the dust and smoke and screaming, sitting beside Erin's left knee exactly as he'd been trained, waiting. She was already moving, not running, moving, which is a different thing, the difference between controlled momentum and panic. She crossed the open ground to Hale in a low sprint, grabbed his plate carrier and dragged him backward toward the base of the left wall, where a shallow depression in the rock offered minimal but real cover. He was conscious, breathing hard, his face gray with pain. "Where?" she said. "Left leg, below the—" He hissed through his teeth. "Below the knee." She was already cutting his trouser leg with the trauma shears from her kit. "Okay, hold still." "Cross." His voice dropped. "I should have—" "Later," she said. "Hold still." She had a tourniquet on and tightened in 19 seconds. She knew because she counted, not from habit, but because counting kept her hands from shaking and her mind from doing the thing it wanted to do, which was go somewhere else entirely. She didn't let it go somewhere else. She pulled the radio from Hale's carrier. "All elements, this is Cross. We have contact. 3 firing positions. Left ridge, right ridge, and forward at the curve. Minimum 6 shooters. We have 4 casualties. I need immediate suppression on the left ridge, and someone needs to bound forward to the right side boulder cluster now." A half-second of silence. Then Pierce's voice, calm as a library. "Moving on the right boulder cluster. Someone give me suppression left." 3 rifles opened up on the left ridge. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't clean, but it was something. Erin looked at Viper. He looked back at her. "Find," she said. He moved. What happened in the next 4 minutes was the kind of thing that doesn't process correctly in real time. The human brain under extreme stress doesn't record events in sequence. It records impressions, snapshots, fragments. Webb, pressing a field dressing against his own forearm with one hand and firing with the other. Pierce, somewhere up on the right boulder cluster now, his rifle working in measured single shots, each one deliberate, each one costing something on the other side. Colton, finally off the stream bed, scrambling to a position that actually covered the forward approach. And Erin, moving through it, through the noise and the smoke and the rocks and the fear, with Viper ranging ahead of her on a loose lead, head low, working the ground. She found the secondary device at the base of the left wall, a crude but functional improvised explosive wired to a pressure plate buried under 3 inches of loose gravel. She didn't have the tools to disarm it properly. She had a knife and 30 seconds, and she used both to cut the command wire and pray the secondary detonator wasn't redundant. It wasn't. She moved to Santos next, who was trying to tie off his own arm wound with his teeth in one hand and not making much progress. "Stop," she said. "I'm fine," he said immediately. "You're not fine. Stop moving." She was kneeling beside him, pulling supplies from her kit with movements that were fast but not frantic. The kind of fast that comes from doing something so many times it no longer requires thought. When Santos looked at her, really looked at her. Not the way he'd looked at her in the truck. A different look entirely. "Who the hell are you?" he said. She tied off the tourniquet, checked the tension. She didn't answer. And that was the moment. Not the explosion, not the firefight, not the tactical precision or the medical competence or the way she'd moved through the kill zone, like someone who had studied it from the inside, but that question, hanging unanswered in the dust and noise and blood of the canyon floor. "Who the hell are you?" Viper came back to her heel, sat. She looked forward at the curve in the canyon, the point where the 3rd firing position was still active, where at least 2 shooters were pinned but not neutralized, where the fight wasn't finished yet. She exhaled. When she moved her arm to key the radio, her left sleeve caught on the shattered edge of Santos's boulder and tore back past the elbow. Santos saw it first, his eyes locked on her upper arm. On the tattoo there, partially obscured, old ink, slightly faded. But the shape of it was still clear enough. A unit insignia that hadn't been officially acknowledged in 6 years. A designation that existed in exactly 0 public records. the designation that field operators called Phantom 6. Santos stared at it for a long moment. Then he looked up at her face. She met his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she turned back toward the canyon, raised her rifle, and went back to work. The tattoo stayed covered. Erin pulled her sleeve down with 2 fingers, quick, automatic, the motion of someone who had done it before, and turned back toward the forward firing position without a word. Santos watched her go. His mouth was still open. His hand was pressed against the tourniquet she'd just applied, and his brain was doing the arithmetic, running the numbers on what he'd just seen, and coming up with an answer that didn't fit anything he thought he knew about the woman who'd ridden in the back of the truck not 40 minutes ago while he'd been making jokes about her dog. He didn't say anything. Not yet. Bam. The third firing position was at the curve, the exact point where the canyon floor bent rightward and the left wall created a natural funnel. Whoever had designed the ambush had designed it well. The forward position pinned the patrol's retreat while the ridge shooters worked the middle. It was a classic L-shaped ambush with a secondary element, which meant planning, which meant resources, which meant this wasn't opportunistic. This had been constructed for them specifically, or for someone very much like them. Erin filed that thought away and kept moving. Pierce had taken out 2 of the ridge shooters. She'd heard his rifle working in that steady, unhurried rhythm that good snipers develop, 1 round at a time, no wasted motion, but the forward position was still active. 2 shooters at minimum, possibly 3, using the rock cluster at the curve as cover. They had a clear line on the center of the stream bed, which meant anyone trying to bound forward to flank them was going to do it under direct fire across 15 meters of open ground with almost no concealment. She stopped at the base of a large boulder 20 meters back from the curve and took a breath. Colton materialized beside her. He was bleeding from a cut above his left eye, shrapnel or rock fragment. Not serious, but it had bled down into his eye socket and he kept blinking it away. He looked at her with an expression she recognized, the face of a man who is recalibrating rapidly and doesn't quite want to admit it. Forward position is dug in behind the curve rocks, he said. 2 shooters confirmed, maybe a third. Pierce can't get an angle from where he is. I know. So what's the play? She looked at Viper. He was at her heel, head up, reading the air. There's a drainage cut on the left side, she said, 10 meters back from the curve, right where the wall base drops. It's shallow, but it runs parallel to the forward position. If someone gets into that cut and moves up the inside of the wall, they can get within 10 meters of the rear of that rock cluster. Colton was quiet for a moment. That drainage cut is 30 feet from here, in the open. 15, and the forward shooters are looking at the streambed center. They're not watching the wall base. You're guessing. I'm calculating. She looked at him. There's a difference. He held her eyes for a second, then looked away first. He didn't argue with her. She noticed that too. I'll take the cut, she said. You and Webb put fire on the curve rocks. Don't stop. Keep their heads down for 60 seconds. And if their heads don't stay down, then I'll figure something else out. Colton opened his mouth, and she could see him working through the protest, the part where he told her she was a K-9 handler and didn't belong in the assault element and someone else should take the cut. She could see the whole architecture of that argument moving across his face. Then he looked at her arm, where the sleeve had torn. He didn't look at it long, just a glance, half a second, but it landed. He nodded. 60 seconds, he said. Go, up. The dash to the drainage cut was 11 meters, and it took 4 seconds, and it felt like 4 hours. She went low and fast, hugging the wall, and she heard the rounds crack past her on the right side, not close, but close enough to feel the disturbance in the air, that particular wrongness that stays with you long after the sound has gone. She hit the drainage cut and went flat and lay there for 2 full seconds with her cheek against the cold earth, breathing once, twice, getting her heart rate back under something useful. Viper landed beside her without being told. She looked at him. He was calm. She focused on that. His breathing, the steadiness of his amber eyes, the absolute absence of panic in his posture. He had worked in worse than this. They both had. And the thing about working in worse than this is that it either breaks you or it builds something in you that functions even when the rest of you wants to stop. A kind of internal architecture that doesn't collapse under pressure because pressure is what it was built for. She started moving up the cut. The drainage channel was shallow, maybe 18 inches deep, carved by decades of runoff from the left wall. It smelled like wet rock and old soil and something faintly chemical that she placed immediately. Residue from the first explosion, dispersed by the blast and now settling into the low ground. She moved on her elbows and knees, rifle in the low carry, Viper tracking her exact movements 2 feet back. Webb and Colton's suppressive fire started above her, controlled bursts, aimed, working across the face of the curve rocks. She heard return fire from the forward position, 2 rifles, slightly different cadence. 2 shooters, not 3. She corrected her count and kept moving. At the 30-meter mark, she stopped. The drainage cut ended here, flattening back into the canyon floor. The rear of the curved rock cluster was 8 meters ahead and slightly left. She could see the base of the largest rock, and behind it, the edge of a butte. 1 shooter. The other was further right, behind a secondary rock she couldn't see from this angle. She lay there for 3 seconds and made a decision that wasn't a decision so much as an inevitability. She had come this far, and the math on going back was worse than the math on going forward. She tapped Viper twice on the flank. He knew that signal. Had known it for 2 years. He went right. Fast and silent, flanking wide around the rock cluster, and she heard the moment it happened. A shout in a language she recognized, then a crash of equipment, then a second shout that was shorter and sharper and cut off. She was already moving by then, up out of the drainage cut, crossing the 8 meters to the left rock in a low run, coming around the base with her rifle up. The shooter behind the left rock was turned toward the noise Viper had made. She gave him 2 seconds to make a decision. He didn't make the right one. The firefight at the forward position ended 22 seconds after she'd come up out of the drainage cut, and when the last rifle went quiet, the canyon was suddenly very, very still. The ringing in her ears slowly separated back into individual sounds. Pierce's radio check from the ridgeline, Webb calling clear from the stream bed, and Viper patting back to her with his head up and his tail moving in that businesslike way that meant the work was done. She exhaled, checked her hands. They were steady. She always checked. Steady hands meant she was still on the right side of the line between functional and not. The day they started shaking was the day she'd have to have a different conversation with herself. Not today. They consolidated on the stream bed at the 800-meter mark, back behind the line of contact, and the picture wasn't good, but it wasn't catastrophic either. 4 casualties. Hale was the most serious. The leg wound was controlled by her tourniquet, but he needed surgery, and he needed it inside a window that was narrowing. Santos's arm was solid, tourniquet holding, no arterial involvement. He was functional, if uncomfortable. 2 others had taken fragment wounds from the first explosion, lacerations, one of them a gash across the forearm deep enough to need closure, but not immediately life-threatening. Pierce had come down off the ridgeline and was moving with a slight hitch in his stride that he hadn't had before. He didn't mention it. Nobody asked. Webb was on the radio working evacuation, calling in the grid, relaying the casualty count, requesting a medevac priority for Hale, and a secondary lift for the walking wounded. His voice was completely level. His forearm was wrapped in a field dressing that was already showing through. Erin worked her way through the casualties in order of severity, the way she'd been taught in a training context that had nothing to do with K-9 handling. She reassessed Hale's tourniquet, adjusted the tension, checked his distal pulse, checked his airway, checked his pupils. He was lucid but fading at the edges, the particular gray around the eyes look of someone managing significant pain with no chemical assistance. He watched her work. "You cut the pressure plate wire," he said. "Yes." "On the left wall, the secondary device." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't see a secondary device." "I know." "How did you He stopped, started again. "Viper found it?" She didn't answer immediately. She was checking the tourniquet strap, running her thumb along the edge to confirm the tension had held. He indicated the general area. "I found it." Hale watched her face. His jaw was tight, from pain, she thought, and from something else that he hadn't figured out how to put into words yet. "My orders nearly got us all killed," he said. "Yes." She said it without heat, without scoring a point, just factually, the way you confirm a calculation. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he looked older than he had 4 hours ago, which she understood. Certain things do that to a person. "The ridge position you flagged," he said. "Before we moved into the valley." "Yes." Pierce confirmed it afterward, said it was good concealment. Very good. I know. How did you see it? She sat back on her heels and looked at him. Outside the immediate demand of the work, she was aware of the weight of the last hour sitting behind her sternum, not heavy enough to stop her, never that, but present, the way it always was. Because I've been in positions like that, she said. I know what they look like from the other side. Hale held her gaze. Before he could say anything else, Webb was at her shoulder. Medevac is 12 minutes out. We need to move the priority casualties to the LZ. It's back at the vehicle staging point. Hale needs a carry, she said. He can't walk on that leg. We know. His tourniquet needs to be checked every 6 minutes until he's in the air. Understood. Webb paused, then quietly, without the edge that had been in his voice all morning. Good work, Cross. She looked at him. He held her gaze without flinching, which was something. Let's move, she said. It's all right. The walk back was slower than the walk in. 2 men on improvised carries, the rest of the team moving in a security formation around them, weapons up, interval spacing correct. Nobody talked. The adrenaline was metabolizing, and the particular exhaustion that follows, the bone-deep, cellular kind, was settling in. Santos walked on his own, but he was quiet, which was notable. Colton was on the left flank, moving mechanically, his jaw working like he was chewing on something he hadn't swallowed yet. Pierce stayed close to Erin without making it obvious. He matched her pace, kept his eyes on his sector, and said nothing for most of the walk. At the 400-meter mark, he said, "The drainage cut." What about it? That was a real move. He said it the way people with his kind of background say things they mean, flat, undecorated. Textbook rear flanking approach. Better angle than anything else we had. It was the only angle. Yeah. He glanced at her. I've been in units that didn't produce guys who could work that geometry on the fly in a firefight. She didn't respond to that. The tattoo, he said. Her jaw tightened slightly. Not much, but he was a sniper. He noticed. I'm not asking, he said. I'm just saying I've seen that insignia before. In a briefing, classified briefing, about 3 years ago. The unit attached to it doesn't officially exist. Then you didn't see it. Right. A pause. I didn't see it. They walked in silence for 20 more meters. I would have stopped the patrol, he said. At Viper's first alert. I would have halted the element and worked the dog through it. She looked at him. I should have said that, he said. Back in the valley. I noticed things. Your scan pattern, the way you moved, the medical bag. I noticed, and I didn't say anything because it wasn't my place and because Hale outranks me. He was quiet for a moment. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. She held that for a beat. Why are you telling me now? Because people almost died today, and I'd rather know where I failed than pretend I didn't. She looked away, back toward the vehicles still visible in the distance. Viper was right, she said. He's always right. I know that now. You should have known it before. You watched him for 2 hours on the brief. His alert behaviors are not subtle. No, Pierce said. They're not. He adjusted his rifle across his chest. Next time, I'll say something. She said nothing. But she didn't dismiss it either, and Pierce, who was good at reading things that weren't said, seemed to understand that is the closest thing to an acknowledgement he was going to get. The medevac birds came in at 0641. 2 Black Hawks, low and fast, kicking up dust as they flared over the vehicle staging area, and the casualty handoff was the controlled chaos of all medical evacuations. Stretchers, shouted information, hands moving fast, the rotor wash flattening everything. Erin gave the flight medic a full handoff on Hale. Mechanism of injury, tourniquet time, vascular assessment, fluid status. The medic listened, nodded, asked 2 clarifying questions, and looked at her once with an expression that she recognized as a professional, recognizing another professional. He didn't ask. She didn't explain. Hale was loaded last. As they moved him toward the aircraft, his hand caught her wrist. Not hard, just the loose grip of a man who doesn't have much strength left to spare. Cross. She looked down at him. His face was gray-white, streaked with dust, and his eyes had the particular quality of someone who is holding themselves together through will alone. He looked like he had something to say, and not enough energy to say it right. "I know," she said. He held her gaze for one more second. Then his hand dropped, and they loaded him into the aircraft, and the Black Hawk lifted and banked south, and she stood in the rotor wash with her hand at her side and watched it go. Viper sat beside her. She reached down and put one hand on his head. He leaned slightly into it, not enough that anyone watching would call it affection, just the small physical acknowledgement that passed between them without needing a name. The debrief was at 1100, in a conference room in the main TOC building that smelled like old coffee and dry erase markers. There was a whiteboard at the front, a rectangular table, and 12 chairs. 3 of those chairs were empty. Hale was in surgery. Santos was in the medical bay getting his arm properly closed, and one of the fragment casualties was still being monitored. The officer running the debrief was a major named Calloway, who had not been on the patrol. He was thick through the shoulders, early 50s, with the particular stillness of someone who had been in enough debriefs to stop being surprised by anything they contained. He asked his questions in order, working through the timeline from the pre-mission brief to the final casualty evacuation. Webb answered most of them. Pierce answered the ones about the ridgeline positions. Colton answered the ones about the forward assault. When Calloway got to the secondary device, there was a pause. Handler Cross located and disabled a secondary IED at the base of the left canyon wall, Webb said. Command wire cut, pressure plate system. Calloway looked at the chair where Erin sat. Walk me through that, Cross. Viper indicated the left wall base after the initial blast. I worked him through the area and located a pressure plate concealed under approximately 3 inches of loose gravel. Command wire ran back toward the east. I cut the wire at the point of maximum accessibility. What was your assessment of the device? Competent construction, not improvised in the field, designed for secondary detonation as survivors moved to cover along the wall. Standard procedural kill zone design. Calloway was writing. And the drainage cut approach to the forward position, he said, not looking up. That was your call? Yes. What was your reasoning? It was the only approach that gave a rear angle without full exposure. The forward shooters were oriented on the stream bed. The wall base was in their dead ground. He finished writing. He looked up at her. His expression was the same as it had been for the last 40 minutes, neutral, professional, giving nothing away. What's your background, Cross? The room went slightly more quiet, which seemed impossible given that nobody had been speaking loudly to begin with. K-9 handler, she said. Attached to this unit for the current operational period. That's your current assignment. He leaned back in his chair. I asked about your background. She held his eyes. That's in my file, sir. I've seen your file. Then you have what you need. A silence. Calloway tapped his pen twice against the table. Something moved across his face, not annoyance, closer to recognition, and he looked back down at his notes. We're going to need a full after-action on the device and the tactical decisions, he said. I want statements from everyone in the element by 1700. He looked around the table. Cross, yours needs to include a full accounting of the K-9 alert behaviors, the timeline of handler warnings to the patrol leader, and your assessment of how the outcome might have been different if those warnings had been acted upon. Nobody spoke. That's all, he said. Afterward, in the corridor outside, Colton fell into step beside her. He walked with her for 20 feet before he said anything. His eye had been cleaned and taped, 4 butterfly closures above the brow, not elegant but functional, and he'd changed his shirt, which meant he'd had time to notice the blood on the old one. The AAR statement, he said. I heard what he said. When he asks for your assessment of how the outcome might have been different, he paused. I mean, it's going to be pretty clear what the statement shows. Yes, she said. It will be. He was quiet for a step. Hale's a good officer, he said. Outside of today, he's genuinely good at this. He's brought people home from situations that... He stopped. I'm not making excuses. I know. He exhaled. I dismissed you this morning. Me personally. I said things. I heard you. I know you heard me. He looked at the wall instead of at her. I want to say I'm sorry, but I'm aware that might sound pretty hollow right now, given the circumstances. She stopped walking. He stopped too, half a step later, and turned. She looked at him, really looked, the way she looked at terrain, working for actual information rather than impression. He had a good face under the tape and the residual grime of the morning. An honest face. The kind that tends to show more than the person intends. It does sound hollow, she said. Right now, today. She held his gaze. But I understand that you mean it, and that's worth something. He nodded, slowly. What I said about the dog, he said. The jokes. Viper doesn't hold grudges. A beat. I'm still deciding. He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it, but the shape of it was there. She started walking again. He didn't follow this time, and she heard him stop in the corridor behind her, and she didn't look back. She found a quiet corner of the motor pool at 1300 and sat on the running board of the far truck with Viper beside her, and ate half a protein bar, and drank most of a bottle of water, and let the morning finish processing. This was the part nobody talked about, the post-contact come down, the way the body starts returning all the systems it had temporarily redirected, the faint tremor in her hands, finally, now that she could afford it, the tightness across her chest that wasn't a medical symptom, just the accumulated pressure of 4 hours of managing everything at once. She looked at her hands. Not bad. The tremor was minor, a 4 on a scale she'd developed herself from her own experience because nobody else had given her one. She pressed her palm flat against her thigh and held it there until it stopped. Viper watched her do this without expression. Good work today, she told him. His tail moved once. She finished the protein bar. The afternoon light was going flat and yellow across the motor pool gravel, and somewhere on the far side of the base, she could hear the routine sounds of a post resuming its normal functions. Engines, voices, the distant percussion of a mechanical shop working on something with too many bolts. Normal sounds. Ordinary sounds. She'd missed them for a while. The ordinary sounds. The ones that meant nothing was happening. She pulled out the small notebook she kept in her left chest pocket, a habit from a previous life, writing things down in the first quiet moment after an operation. Not operational details, not tactical notes, just words, whatever was there. She held the pen over the page for a moment. Then she wrote, Viper was right. He's always right. The rest is just noise. She closed the notebook. Across the motor pool, the door to the operations building opened and Pierce came out, moving in that slightly uneven way that he was clearly trying to suppress. He scanned the area in that instinctive long-range way, found her sitting on the running board, and crossed toward her without hesitation. He stopped a few feet away and looked down at her. 1,700 statement, he said. I know. Have you thought about what you're going to write? I'm going to write what happened. He was quiet for a moment. The part where the K-9 handler's warnings were dismissed by the patrol leader. That part, yes. He sat down on the gravel, which she hadn't expected. He sat with his back against the truck tire and his rifle across his knees, and his eyes on the middle distance, and for a while neither of them said anything. The ambush was pre-staged, he said eventually. Yes. Good concealment on the ridgeline, good device placement on the secondary. The forward position had clear arcs of fire and defensive cover. He paused. That's not a local setup. That's someone who knew doctrine, who knew how a standard observation patrol would move through that valley. I know. Someone who knew we'd be there. She looked at the side of his face. He was still watching the middle distance. I noticed the same thing, she said. He turned his head and looked at her. The device placement, she said. Pressure plate on the left wall where casualties would naturally move for cover after the initial blast. That's not improvised thinking. That's counter-casualty doctrine. Somebody planned for the reaction, not just the ambush. Pierce was quiet. That means planning time, she said. Intelligence about our route. Either the patrol plan leaked, or there was prior surveillance on the valley that identified it as our likely approach. Which means someone either had access to our operations, he said slowly, or has been watching this area long enough to predict our patterns. The motor pool was very quiet between them. Have you told Calloway this? Pierce asked. Not yet. You're going to. Yes. He looked back at the operations building. That's a significant thing to put in an AAR. I know. It opens a lot of questions about this unit, about who had access to what. I know that too. He was quiet again for a long moment. The afternoon light had shifted, shadows stretching longer across the gravel. Somewhere in the distance, a vehicle engine turned over and died. Who are you really? He said. Not the way Santos had said it in the canyon, sharp, reactive, with the shock of the moment. Pierce said it the way he said most things, level, genuine, not rhetorical. She looked at the notebook in her hand. Someone who notices things, she said. He held that for a moment. The tattoo, he said. You said you didn't see it. I didn't. He looked at her. But I know what Phantom 6 is, what it was. He paused. Those units ran operations that don't appear in any record that anyone with a clearance below a certain level can access. The operators in those units, the ones that went deep cover, they came out of those programs and they disappeared. New assignments, new identities, quiet postings where nobody would think to look for them. Erin said nothing. K-9 handler at a mid-tier special operations post, Pierce said. That's a pretty quiet posting. The silence stretched between them like wire. I'm going to write my AAR, she said. And in it, I'm going to say what the alert behaviors were, what the timeline of warnings looked like, and what the tactical analysis of the device placement suggests about the pre-planning behind this ambush. She stood up, the notebook going back into her chest pocket. That's what I'm going to say. He looked up at her from the ground. And the rest of it? He asked. She looked down at him for a moment, this quiet, careful man who had seen more than he said and said less than he knew, and who had chosen to go up on those boulder rocks when it mattered, and who had come to sit in the motor pool gravel and ask her real questions. The rest of it, she said, isn't in the AAR. She called Viper to heel with 2 fingers and walked back toward the operations building, and Pierce stayed in the gravel with his back against the truck tire, watching her go, working through the arithmetic of what she'd just told him. Behind her, the afternoon was going to gold. Somewhere in the valley they'd just left, there were answers nobody had started looking for yet, and whoever had put those answers there was counting on nobody asking the right questions. Erin Cross had a feeling the counting was about to stop. The operations building smelled like burnt coffee and recycled air, and the particular tension that settles into a space after something has gone badly wrong and everyone inside knows it. But nobody has started saying so out loud yet. Erin submitted her AAR statement at 16:48. 14 minutes early, which was not an accident. She had written it in longhand first, then typed it herself on one of the terminal stations in the far corner of the admin section, and she had been precise about every word in the same way she was precise about everything that mattered, not from perfectionism, but from the understanding that imprecise language creates space for imprecise conclusions, and imprecise conclusions, in her experience, had a tendency to get people killed. The statement said what happened, the timeline of Viper's alerts, the exact language of each radio transmission to Hale, the terrain observations she had made before the patrol entered the valley, the secondary device, the drainage cut approach, the tactical analysis of the ambush construction, and at the end, 3 paragraphs that she had rewritten twice before she got the language right. Her assessment that the ambush had been pre-staged with specific knowledge of the patrol route and standard movement doctrine, that the device placement indicated counter-casualty planning beyond opportunistic construction, and that these factors together suggested either a compromise of operational planning or sustained pattern-of-life surveillance sufficient to predict unit behavior. She hit submit and sat for a moment looking at the blank screen. Then she closed the terminal and went to find Viper. Calloway called her into his office at 7:30 the next morning. His office was small and organized with the particular austerity of someone who has lived out of a bag for most of their adult life and never fully trusted that a desk would be there tomorrow. One window facing north. A bookshelf with actual books on it, manuals, doctrine publications, 2 worn paperbacks with broken spines. A photograph on the wall that Erin didn't look at directly, but noted in her peripheral scan. 4 people. Desert background. One of them possibly Calloway, 20 years and 30 pounds ago. He was standing when she came in, which was slightly unusual. He gestured to the chair across his desk. She sat. Viper settled at her feet. Calloway sat down, opened a folder, looked at it for a moment, then looked at her. "Your AAR," he said. "Yes, sir." "The final section, your assessment of the ambush construction." "Yes, sir." He tapped the folder twice. "You understand that what you've written here constitutes a formal allegation that someone with access to operational planning may have compromised this mission." "I understand it raises that as a possibility, sir. I wrote it as an assessment, not an allegation." "The distinction matters legally, less so operationally." He leaned back. "Who have you discussed this assessment with?" "Pierce. Informally, the day of, nobody else." "What did Pierce say?" "He reached the same general conclusions independently." Calloway was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, a vehicle crossed the compound. The sound of it passed, and the quiet came back. "Your file," he said. "Yes, sir." "Not your current file. Your full file. The one that requires a different level of access than Major Calloway possesses on an ordinary day." He watched her face. "I made some calls yesterday evening, pulled in a favor I've been sitting on for about 4 years. Erin said nothing. "Phantom 6, he said. The room was very still. She held his eyes without speaking, which was itself a kind of answer. "You ran 7 classified operations over 3 years, he said. Deep penetration, denied area, no extraction guarantee. The last one," he paused. "The report on the last one has more redactions than text. What's left reads like something went very wrong." "Things went wrong," she said. "How wrong?" She looked at the wall to his left, not avoiding the question, working through what portion of it she was willing to answer. "Wrong enough that the program was suspended," she said. "Wrong enough that the remaining operators were separated and reassigned under new designations. Wrong enough that I decided I'd rather work with Viper than go back into that world." "But you're still in that world," he said it without accusation. "The skills don't go away. The way you move doesn't go away. The way you read terrain and personnel and tactical geometry, that doesn't switch off because you change your assignment patch." "No," she said. "It doesn't." He folded his hands on the desk. He had the hands of someone who had spent time on a trigger, not soft, knuckles slightly enlarged, a faint scar across the right index finger. "The ambush yesterday," he said. "If your assessment is correct, it's correct. Then we have a serious problem on this post that goes beyond one bad patrol." He looked at her steadily. "I need people I can trust to help me understand the shape of that problem. People who know what operational compromise looks like from the inside." She looked at him. "I'm a K-9 handler, sir. You're the person who saved 11 lives yesterday and then wrote the clearest tactical assessment I've received since I took command of this post." His voice didn't rise, didn't need to. "I'm not asking you to lie about what you are. I'm asking you to stop pretending to be only what your current assignment says." The silence went on long enough to have weight. "What are you asking specifically?" she said. "I'm asking you to work with me on the source question. Informally. Off the record until we have something solid enough to take to a level above mine." He paused. "You, Pierce, and whatever access to pattern analysis your previous experience gives you." Erin looked down at Viper. He was watching a point somewhere to the left of Calloway's desk, with the focused patience of an animal that has learned that waiting is most of the work. She thought about the valley, the tripwire, the rockets, the particular sound of Hale's voice when he ordered her forward the last time, 3 seconds before the world came apart. "If we find something," she said, "what happens with it?" "It goes up the chain, officially, with full documentation. And the people who compromise the mission face the appropriate consequences. Even if those people are on this post. Especially then," he held her gaze. "I've been doing this long enough to have seen what happens when command protects its own at the expense of the truth. I'm not interested in that legacy." She was quiet for a moment. "I want Pierce formally included," she said. "Not informally. He saw what he saw from the ridgeline, and he has the observational skills this kind of work needs. Agreed. And my K-9 duties stay current. Viper and I continue as assigned. No change in our official status. Also agreed. Then yes, she said. I'll help. Calloway nodded once. He didn't smile or extend a hand or mark the moment in any of the ways people mark moments. He just nodded, the way you nod when something complicated has been made slightly less complicated, and reached for the next folder on his desk. We'll meet tonight, he said. 2000. Here. She stood. Viper stood with her. Cross, Calloway said without looking up. Sir. Yesterday, what you did in that valley. He paused. I've read a lot of after-action reports. I've been in a lot of bad situations myself. What you did, how you managed that contact, was exceptional. I want you to know that someone with the appropriate clearance and the appropriate experience has seen it and recognized it for what it was. She stood at the door for a moment. Viper did most of it, she said, and she left before Calloway could respond. The 9 days that followed were ordinary on the surface and anything but underneath. She ran her K-9 duties, which meant morning training blocks with Viper in the detection lanes, afternoon patrol attachments with whatever element was running that day, and the administrative work that came with managing an animal in a military environment, health records, equipment maintenance, the particular bureaucratic friction of getting a non-standard attachment recognized in the logistics system. It was unglamorous work. She had always found that steadying. Underneath that, in the evenings and in the spaces between, she and Pierce and Calloway worked through the question of the valley. Pierce pulled the patrol log records for the previous 90 days, 12 patrols that had used the Northern Valley approach. He mapped them, plotted the timings, identified the pattern. The route had been used 8 times in the last 60 days, predictable enough that someone watching would have been able to anticipate the next use within a 72-hour window. Erin worked the personnel side, who had access to the patrol scheduling system, who had been on post during the relevant planning window, who had departed the post in the 72 hours before the ambush, personnel movements, vehicle logs, communication records. It was painstaking work, and it was incomplete work, because they were doing it informally, and without the investigative authority that would have opened certain records automatically. She had done this kind of work before, in a different context, and she knew its particular frustration. You can see the shape of the truth without being able to touch it directly, like something submerged, visible through the water but distorted. She kept coming back to one name. She didn't say it out loud for 6 days. She sat with it the way she sat with a lot of things that weren't ready yet, held it, examined it from different angles, looked for the reasons she might be wrong. She couldn't find enough of them. On the 10th day after the ambush, Hale came back to the post. He arrived on the afternoon transport, moving carefully on crutches, his left leg in a rigid brace from mid-thigh to ankle. He was thinner than he'd been, hospital thin, the kind that happens quickly. His color was better than it had been on the stretcher in the valley, but his face had the particular quality of someone who had spent time in a hospital bed with too many hours and not enough distraction, which meant he had been thinking. She saw him from across the compound as he made his way toward the admin building. He walked slowly, and he held himself correctly on the crutches, not awkward with them, already adjusted to the new geometry of moving, and he scanned the compound as he walked. That part hadn't changed. The scan was automatic. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. He stopped. She didn't look away. He changed direction, came toward her, the crutches working across the uneven gravel, and she stayed where she was. Viper stood and watched the approach without tension. He had Hale's scent cataloged from the valley. Hale stopped 4 feet away. He looked worse than she'd expected and better than she'd feared. The leg was the obvious damage, but there was something else, quieter, a change in the quality of his stillness. Like something had been removed from his expression that had been covering something else, and what was underneath was more honest. Cross, he said. Captain. She paused. How's the leg? Nerve damage in the calf, uncertain prognosis for full recovery. He said it flatly, the way you say things you've had time to make peace with. Physical therapy is long. I'm sorry. Don't be. He held her eyes. The leg is because I didn't listen to you. If I'd stopped the patrol at Viper's first alert, we'd all have gone back to the vehicles and driven home, and nobody would have needed surgery. She didn't argue with that. I read your AAR, he said. Okay. The last section, your assessment of the ambush pre-planning. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him working through something, some interior calculation that had started in a hospital bed and hadn't finished yet. You think someone on this post fed them the route, he said. I think it's the most consistent explanation for the device placement and the ambush construction, she said. Yes. Who? I don't know yet. He held her gaze. But you have a direction. She said nothing. He nodded slowly. Calloway talked to me this morning. He told me you were working on the source question with Pierce. He paused. He asked if I wanted to be included. What did you say? I said I'd ask you. She looked at him for a moment. His face was honest in the way it had been honest in the valley, stripped of the command posture, just a man with a question and enough humility left to ask it properly. You were the patrol leader, she said. You had access to the planning documents. Your name is in the routing log. He went very still. I'm not saying that means anything, she said. I'm saying that if you're in the room when we work through this, your position has to be acknowledged as a factor that was examined and cleared or not cleared. A long silence. You're telling me I'm a suspect, he said. I'm telling you that everyone with access is a factor, including me, technically, including Pierce. She held his gaze. If you're clean, the process clears you. If you're not comfortable with that process, I'm clean, he said. Then you're in. He looked at her for another moment, and something in his face went through a change she couldn't quite name. Not relief, not gratitude. Something more complicated than either of those. I should have listened to the dog, he said. Yes. I should have listened to you. Also yes. He made a sound that was almost a laugh, short, dry, with no humor in it. You don't make this easy. I'm not trying to make it easy. I'm trying to find out who almost killed your team. She looked at him steadily. Are you in? He straightened on his crutches. Yes, he said. Kotik. They met that night in Calloway's office, all four of them, and Erin spread her personnel map across the desk, and Pierce put his patrol route overlay beside it, and Hale sat in the corner chair with his leg extended and his jaw set, and they worked through it together. The shape of what they had was this. Someone with access to the post's patrol scheduling system, with either direct communication capability outside of monitored channels or contact with an intermediary who did, and with sufficient understanding of military movement doctrine to advise on device placement and ambush construction. That narrowed the field to 37 people. She had been working on narrowing it further. The vehicle log from the 72-hour pre-ambush window showed 11 personnel departures from the post. 9 had documented, verified purposes. 2 did not. She put those 2 names on the table. Pierce looked at them. Hale looked at them. Calloway looked at them and was quiet for a long time. One of the names was a logistics coordinator named Warrant Officer Dennis Farrow, who had been on post for 11 months and who had access to the scheduling system as part of his administrative duties. The vehicle log showed a departure 3 days before the ambush, destination logged as a supply run to the forward depot, return logged 14 hours later. The forward depot was a 3-hour round trip, 14 hours left, 8 unaccounted for. Farrow, Hale said. He said it the way you say a name when you're testing whether it fits something. He's been here 11 months, Pierce said. That's long enough to establish pattern recognition on our route selections. It's also long enough to build relationships, Calloway said, to know who is watching what and when. He had access to the patrol log the week before the ambush, Erin said. I checked the system access records. His credentials were used to open the routing file on a Tuesday evening. Nobody else's credentials touched it in the 12 hours prior. The room was quiet. That's circumstantial, Hale said. Everything we have is circumstantial, she said. That's the problem. We need something else. What kind of something else? Pierce asked. She had been thinking about this part for 3 days. The ambush positions on the ridgeline, she said. Pierce, when you swept the right ridge afterward, was there any equipment left? Pierce was quiet for a second. A shell casing, couple of fast rope residue marks, and he paused. There was a wad of parachute cord left tied to a rock anchor, like someone had rigged a hasty rappel point and cut the cord on departure. What color was the cord? Red and black, non-standard. She nodded. That's a specific sourcing signature, she said. That color combination is Eastern European supply chain. It shows up in specific markets that are accessible from specific locations. She looked at the map. If Pharaoh drove 8 hours that day and came back, there's a radius of locations he could have reached and returned from. I want to see if any of those locations have been flagged in the procurement database for that cord type. Calloway looked at her. I can access that database, he said slowly, but it requires me to run a query that will be logged. Run it as a routine supply chain audit, she said. You do those regularly? Quarterly? Then this is your quarterly audit. You're checking for non-standard equipment procurement in the regional supply network. It's entirely within your normal authority. He held her gaze for a moment. You've done this before, he said. She didn't answer. The database query, he said. You already know what it's going to find, don't you? I know what it's likely to find, she said. I've spent 9 days working backward from the ambush site through the available information. This is the thread that's still exposed. She looked at the map. Pull on it. Calloway reached across the desk and opened his computer. The query came back in 40 minutes. In that 40 minutes, nobody left the office. Pierce stood at the window. Hale sat with his eyes on the floor, working through something private. Erin sat against the wall with Viper and her notebook open on her knee, writing nothing, just holding the pen. When the result came up on Calloway's screen, he read it once, then read it again. Then he turned the monitor so the others could see. The regional supply database had 3 flagged procurement records for non-standard parachute cord, red and black, Eastern European specification, in the preceding 6 months. 2 were legitimate contract purchases with full documentation. 1 was a cash transaction at a civilian supply store 41 miles from the location that fell within Pharaoh's 8-hour window, 11 days before the ambush. The cash transaction had no name attached, but it had a surveillance camera. Calloway looked at Erin. I need to escalate this, he said. Yes, she said. You do. Above my level. Well above it. He picked up his desk phone. Then he looked at all of them, Pierce at the window, Hale in the corner, Erin against the wall. This is going to move quickly once I make this call, he said. And when it does, it's going to get complicated. Investigations, interviews, potentially more exposure than just Pharaoh. He paused. I want everyone in this room to understand what they're agreeing to. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Hale said, Make the call. Calloway dialed. What happened after that was the part that doesn't compress neatly into a single evening. It rarely does. Investigations have their own pace, their own bureaucratic gravity, and the thing that breaks open in one room at 2100 on a Thursday doesn't resolve by morning. It spreads slowly, carefully, through channels that are designed more for security than for speed, and the people inside the investigation have to live with the ordinary world continuing around them while the extraordinary thing they've found works its way through the system. Pharaoh was placed under surveillance the next morning, quietly, without his knowledge. Erin was not part of that process. It moved above her, above Calloway's immediate command, into the hands of people with different badges and different authority. She was told to maintain her normal duties and be available for interview. She maintained her normal duties. What she could not quite maintain was the particular steadiness that she usually wore without thinking about it, the internal architecture that stayed functional under pressure. In the days that followed the phone call, something in that architecture was less certain than she was used to, not damaged, just aware of itself in a way it usually wasn't. She had spent 6 years in a quiet posting specifically to avoid this, the work of finding things that were hidden, the work of following threads to ends that caused damage in multiple directions. She had been good at that work and she had paid a price for being good at it, and the price had been a kind of exhaustion that didn't respond to sleep. She hadn't expected to be back here. She sat in the training field with Viper one morning, 4 days after Calloway's phone call, in the early light before the rest of the post was fully awake. Viper was working a detection lane, 100 meters of mixed terrain with 8 concealed target objects, which he located with the methodical, unhurried certainty that had marked him since the first week of his training. He had never missed a target. Not once in 2 years. She watched him work and thought about that. The reliability of a thing that was built for a single purpose and did that purpose without the secondary complications of ego or ambition or the accumulated weight of past decisions. Viper found what was hidden. That was his job. He didn't have complex feelings about it. She envied him that sometimes. He came back to her with the last indicator, sitting cleanly, facing her, the particular stillness of task completion. "Good," she said. He got up and shook himself and looked at her with those amber eyes that were somewhere between animal and something that didn't have a clean word for it. Her radio crackled. "Cross." It was Pierce's voice. "Calloway's office. Now!" The quality of his voice stopped her. Pierce, who delivered information the way he delivered rounds, without unnecessary force, had something in his voice she hadn't heard before. She was on her feet before she'd consciously decided to move. Calloway's office had 4 people in it when she arrived. Calloway, Pierce, Hale on his crutches, and a man she didn't recognize who wore civilian clothes and a visitor's badge and had the specific quality of stillness that she associated with people from a very particular kind of background. He looked at her when she came in. She looked at him. Something moved across his face that she couldn't read immediately, and then she could, and it landed like cold water, recognition. He knew who she was. Not who she was currently, who she had been. "Sergeant Cross," he said. The rank, not the current one, the old one from the time before. Her jaw tightened slightly. "We haven't been introduced," she said. "No." He didn't offer his name. "I've been brought up to speed on the work you and Major Calloway's team have done over the past 10 days. The Pharaoh thread." He paused. "We moved on it this morning." The room was very quiet. "He's in custody?" Calloway asked. "He is. The surveillance footage from the supply store confirmed the purchase. His personal device, which we were able to access this morning, contained communication records that are significantly more extensive than a single supply run." The man looked at Erin. "You were right about the pre-planning. The route had been communicated to an outside contact 9 days before the ambush. Pharaoh was the source." Hale made a sound, not quite a word, just a sharp exhale. "Who was the contact?" Pierce said. "That investigation is ongoing and above what I can share in this room." The man folded his hands. "What I can tell you is that your assessment of the ambush construction, the counter-casualty device placement, the 3-directional firing arc, the command-detonated primary, matches the signature of a network we've been tracking for 14 months. Yesterday's confirmation is the clearest picture we've had of their operational capability." He looked at Erin again. "Your written assessment from the AAR," he said. "The 3 final paragraphs. They identified the right questions in language that matched our own analytical framework almost exactly." He paused. "The kind of framework that comes from a specific type of experience." The room waited. "I'm here informally," he said. "Nothing I say in this room is official, and nothing you say leaves it. But I want to ask you, directly, whether you have interest in working this network beyond the scope of what happened in that valley." Erin looked at him. She looked at the photograph on Calloway's wall that she had avoided looking at directly since the first morning, and she looked at it now, properly, taking in the 4 figures in the desert background, and she recognized the landscape, and she recognized one of the other faces in the photograph, and something she had held very carefully for 6 years shifted slightly in her chest. She looked back at the man in civilian clothes. "Tell me what you actually know about the network," she said. He held her gaze. "Sit down," he said. She pulled out the chair across from him. Viper settled at her feet. And the room, which had been many things over the past 10 days, a debrief space, a planning room, a place where difficult calls were made, became something else. The place where Erin Cross stopped running from what she was and started deciding what to do about it. His name was Garrett. No last name offered, no rank indicated, nothing on the visitor badge beyond a case number that meant something to someone in a building Erin had never officially been inside. He had the kind of face that was specifically designed to be forgettable, medium everything, the sort of features that slid out of memory 20 minutes after you stopped looking at them. She recognized the quality because she had worked with people who cultivated it deliberately, and because at one point in her life she had been reasonably good at it herself. He talked for 40 minutes. He talked about the network the way analysts talk about networks they've been studying for a long time, with the particular mixture of precision and frustration that comes from knowing a great deal about something you can't quite touch. 14 months of signals intelligence, 3 confirmed operations across 2 countries, a financial trail that moved through shell structures in 4 jurisdictions before disappearing into cash. The network was not large, maybe 30 people at the operational level, fewer at the planning tier, but it was disciplined and patient, and it understood military doctrine well enough to exploit it. They've hit 2 other installations in the past 8 months, Garrett said, both times using inside access to compromise patrol routes. Both times the inside contact was a mid-tier logistics or administrative role, below the level where people watch closely, above the level where the critical information doesn't flow. Farrow fits that profile exactly, Pierce said. He does. He was recruited 14 months ago, we think, though the first confirmed communication is 11 months back, about a month after he arrived on post. Hale was very still in the corner. Someone recruited him before he was assigned here, he said. We believe the assignment was the recruitment. Someone with access to personnel placement put him here specifically. Garrett paused. That's a different problem than a soldier who went bad on his own. That's a problem with a longer root system. The room held that for a moment. Erin had been listening with her hands flat on her thighs and her eyes on the desk surface, running the architecture of it through her mind, not the new information, which she had mostly anticipated, but the question underneath it, which was the one Garrett hadn't answered yet. You said you wanted to ask whether I had interest in working this network beyond the scope of what happened in the valley, she said. Garrett looked at her. What exactly would that look like, she said. Consultative initially, your written assessment identified the network's operational signature more precisely than 14 months of dedicated analysis. That's not a coincidence. That's pattern recognition from direct experience with similar construction. He paused. We want to understand what you recognize and why, what the signature tells you that it doesn't tell us. And after the consultative phase? He was quiet for a moment. That depends on what the consultation produces. She looked at him steadily. You're asking me to come back in. I'm asking you to have a conversation. Those aren't the same thing. No, he said. They're not. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise. He leaned forward slightly. But I'll tell you what I told the people who sent me here. The analysis you produced from a K-9 handler's assignment on 11 days of informal investigation, without access to our database, without our resources, working from a position where nobody was taking you seriously. That analysis identified the operational fingerprint of a network that 14 months of dedicated effort has not been able to adequately characterize. He held her gaze. That's not nothing. She looked at the wall, the photograph again, the desert, the 4 figures. The last operation, she said, Phantom 6, the one with more redactions than text. Garrett's expression didn't change. What about it? Did you read the unredacted version? A pause. Yes, he said. Then you know why I took a K-9 posting. He was quiet for a moment. I know what happened. I know what the cost was. I also know that you were the only member of that team who came out of it with the operational picture intact, who understood what had gone wrong and why, and what it meant. He paused. I know you've been carrying that for 6 years. I've been fine, she said. I didn't say you weren't fine. The silence that followed had an edge to it. Calloway cleared his throat quietly. This doesn't need to be decided today. No, Garrett said. It doesn't. He looked at Erin. Think about it. I'll be on post through tomorrow. He stood, gathered nothing from the desk because he'd brought nothing to the desk, which she noted. He moved to the door, then stopped. The drainage cut approach, he said, without turning around, in the valley. I read Pierce's statement. You moved 11 meters under direct fire to reach it, and then worked a rear flank with a K-9 partner while coordinating suppression from 2 rifles. He paused. That's Phantom 6 muscle memory. He left. The door closed. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Hale said, Who is he? Someone from well above my pay grade, Calloway said. Above yours, sir? Pierce said, but significantly. Calloway looked at Erin. You don't have to do anything he's suggesting. I know that. Your current assignment is valid. Your work here matters. What you've done for this unit in the past 11 days, I know, she said. I need to think. She stood up. Viper stood with her. I'll be in the training field, she said. She wasn't in the training field. She was on the north side of the motor pool, sitting on the same running board she'd sat on 10 days ago, with her back against the truck and Viper beside her and the afternoon doing what afternoons in this part of the world did, flattening the light into something gold and directionless that made distances hard to judge. She had known, sitting across from Garrett, that this moment was coming. She had known it the way you know things that you've been carefully not knowing for a long time, suddenly and completely, and with the particular exhaustion of having held something at arm's length for longer than it wanted to stay there. Phantom 6. The program had lasted 4 years, 7 operations in denied areas, working with partners who were not American, against targets that did not officially exist, in countries where the presence of American military personnel would have caused problems that the word diplomatic doesn't quite cover. The work was precise and dangerous, and she had been good at it in the specific way that certain people are good at things that cost them something every time they do them. The last operation had gone wrong at the 14-hour mark. She didn't think about the specifics if she could help it. She had gotten reasonably good at that. But the shape of it was always there, the particular weight of decisions made under time pressure with incomplete information that turned out to be the wrong decisions, and the faces of people who were there because of those decisions and then weren't. 3 people. She had come out. They hadn't. The program had been suspended 3 months later, officially for resource reasons, which was the kind of language that covered a range of actual reasons, none of which were resource reasons. The operators were reassigned, new designations, quiet postings. She had asked for K-9. She hadn't had a specific reason except that she wanted to work with something that was honest in a way that people often weren't, something that communicated directly and without agenda, something that wouldn't pretend a situation was anything other than what it was. Viper had been assigned to her 8 months into the posting, and in the 2 years since she had come to the specific and unsentimental conclusion that he was the most reliable partner she had ever had in any context. She put her hand on his back. He leaned into it slightly. She thought about Garrett's question, about the network, about Pharaoh sitting in a holding room somewhere on post right now, having been walked out of his office that morning by people with authority she wasn't part of, about the supply store 41 miles away, and the parachute cord and the surveillance camera, and the careful 10-day thread she and Pierce and Hale and Calloway had pulled together from raw information and pattern recognition and the kind of operational intuition that 6 years of a quiet posting apparently hadn't taken away. She thought about Hale's face when she told him the ambush had been pre-staged, the particular expression of someone who is revising their model of the world and doesn't like the new version, but understands that the new version is correct. She thought about Santos's voice in the canyon. Who the hell are you? She had not answered that question. She still wasn't sure she knew how. Her radio crackled. Cross? It was Calloway. Can you come back to the building? Hale wants to talk to you, and Santos just came off medical status. He's asking if he can sit in. She looked at the sky. Yeah, she said. Give me 5 minutes. They were all there when she came back. Calloway behind his desk. Pierce at the window again. That was becoming his position, she thought, the one who watches the outside while the inside conversation happens. Hale in the corner chair, leg extended, forearms on his knees. Santos in a chair someone had brought in from the hallway, his right arm in a sling, looking like a man who had spent 11 days in a medical bay, reconsidering every conversation he'd had in the 48 hours before he ended up there. Erin sat down. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Santos said, I want to say something. She looked at him. He had the expression of someone who had rehearsed what he was about to say and was now finding that the rehearsed version wasn't quite what he wanted. He looked at his arm, back at her. In the truck, he said. The things I said, about the dog, about... He stopped. I was being an idiot. I do that sometimes. I get nervous and I talk too much and it comes out wrong, and usually the wrong is just annoying, but that morning the wrong was... He paused. It was disrespectful. To you and to Viper both. And you saved my arm. Maybe more than my arm. And I've been sitting on a cot for 11 days with nothing to do but think about that, so. He didn't finish the sentence. She looked at him for a moment. Viper doesn't hold grudges, she said. You said that already. Still deciding on my end? He nodded, seemed to understand that was what was available and was willing to take it. Hale spoke next. I've been talking to Command, he said, about the AAR, about what it documents. He shifted on the chair, the leg brace making the adjustment complicated. They're conducting a formal review of the pre-mission process. The decision to override handler warnings. The tactical response to the K-9 alert. He held her gaze. It's not going to be comfortable. I know. My decisions are going to be examined closely. I know that too. I'm not asking you to soften what you wrote. Good, she said. Because I won't. He held her gaze for another moment. I know. I'm just telling you that I know that, and that I think the review is appropriate, and that I intend to be honest about every decision I made that morning. He paused. Including the ones that were wrong. It was quietly said. She had heard people perform accountability in a lot of different registers over the years. The ones who did it because they had to. The ones who did it because they wanted credit for doing it. The ones who did it badly, but genuinely. Hale did it in a way that didn't seem to want anything from her. She nodded once. The program review is also recommending a new protocol, Calloway said. K-9 alert procedures integrated into tactical planning at the mission briefing stage, not as an afterthought. Handler assessment included in go/no-go criteria for patrol elements operating in medium to high threat environments. That's long overdue, Pierce said. Yes. Calloway looked at Erin. Command wants to put someone in charge of developing the training framework, the integration protocols, how handlers and operators work together rather than parallel to each other. He paused. They asked me to recommend someone. She looked at him. I recommended you, he said. The room was quiet. I'm a K-9 handler, she said. You're the most qualified person on this post to design a program that treats K-9 capability as a genuine tactical asset rather than a support attachment. He held her gaze. You understand both sides of the equation. You understand what operators need and what handlers can provide and where those two things fail to connect. Nobody else in this building has that. She sat with it for a moment. What's the scope? She said. Training curriculum for integration, assessment criteria for handler inclusion in mission planning, protocol for processing K-9 alerts in the field, implementation across all operational elements on post. He paused. You'd have a team. You'd have resources. You'd report to me directly. And my K-9 duties? Continue. You and Viper stay active. This is in addition to, not instead of. She looked at Viper. He was watching the door with the patient attention of an animal that understands it is in a room where things are being decided and is content to wait. Garrett's offer, she said. The consultation. That's separate, Calloway said. Your call doesn't affect this. She thought about both of them, the consultation that was probably not really a consultation, and the program development that was exactly what it presented itself as. Two different things. Two different directions in which the next period of her life could move. She thought about the valley, about Viper frozen in the stream bed, absolutely certain, while 12 armed men laughed at both of them, about what it would have meant if that alert had been processed correctly, if the protocol had existed, if someone had built the framework that said, when the dog stops, everyone stops. I'll take the program, she said. Calloway nodded. And Garrett? Pierce asked. I'll talk to him, she said. I'll give him the consultation. What happens after that? She paused. I'm not making that decision today. Hale had been watching her through all of this. He spoke now quietly. The tattoo, he said. Santos turned his head. I didn't see it clearly in the valley, Hale said. Santos did. Pierce did. He paused. But I heard things. In the 11 days I was out. Calloway told me enough. And I've been doing the math on who you are and what you've done and what it cost you. He was quiet for a moment. Phantom 6. She said nothing. I don't need the details, he said. I'm not asking for them, but I want to say, as the officer who dismissed your warnings that morning, who ordered you forward when you were telling me to stop, who treated you like a support attachment instead of what you actually are." He stopped. The words were clearly not coming easily. "What you did in that valley, what you've done in the 11 days since. I've commanded a lot of good people. I've served with people who are exceptional." He met her eyes directly. "You're in a different category." She held his gaze for a moment. "So is Viper," she said. Something moved across Hale's face that might have been the beginning of a real smile. "Yes," he said. "He is." She found Garrett in the small conference room off the main corridor at 1900, sitting with a cup of coffee and a tablet he closed when she came in. She sat across from him. Viper lay down beside her chair. "The program development," she said. "I'm taking it." He nodded. "Good. This post needs it." "The consultation, I'll give you what I have on the network's operational signature. My pattern recognition from Phantom 6 applied to what I saw in the valley and what the ambush construction tells me about their planning doctrine." She held his gaze. "That's what I can offer right now. That's what I'm willing to offer right now." "What does right now mean?" "It means not today, and not this month, and not until I've done what I've agreed to do here." She paused. "The people on this post almost died because nobody built a framework for how to use what they had available. I'm going to build that framework. And when it's built—" She stopped. "When it's built," Garrett said, "I'll decide then." He looked at her for a long moment. "The last operation," he said. "Phantom 6. The unredacted version." He paused. "You made the right call. Under the information you had at the time, in the window you had to work in. The review board agreed. It's in the file, it's just buried under the parts that are easier to look at." She kept her face still. "I know what the file says," she said. "Do you believe it?" She looked at the table. This was the part she hadn't built a clean answer for, in 6 years of trying. The part that woke her up sometimes, not often, but sometimes. The specific arithmetic of 3 people who'd gone in and hadn't come out, and a decision she'd made at the 14-hour mark under time pressure with incomplete information. The review board's conclusion was filed correctly, and she understood the reasoning, and she believed the reasoning was sound, and she also understood that believing a conclusion is sound is not the same thing as carrying it lightly. "Some days," she said. He held that. "That's honest," he said. "I've been in places where honesty wasn't the operational priority," she said. "I'm trying to not be in those places anymore." He nodded slowly. He picked up his coffee. He looked at it rather than at her. "For what it's worth," he said, "the work you did on this network in the past 11 days, the thread you pulled, the assessment you wrote, the way you connected the supply chain signature to the ambush construction, that saved whoever their next target was going to be. We've been trying to get ahead of this network for over a year. You gave us the angle we needed in 11 days from a K-9 posting." He paused. "That matters. Independent of everything else, that matters." She looked at Viper. He was watching the door again, patient, certain, ready for whatever came next without drama or ambivalence. She thought about what Pierce had said in the valley after everything was over. "I know what they look like from the other side." She thought about what she'd told Hale. "Because I've been in positions like that." 6 years ago, she had come to Fort Blackstone, or a posting very much like it, looking for something that didn't require her to be what she'd been. Something quieter. Something where the cost of doing the work didn't have a human face. What she'd found was Viper. What she hadn't expected was everything else. She looked at Garrett. "I'll send you the written consultation by the end of the week," she said. 12 pages, maybe 50. Everything the ambush construction tells me about the network's planning doctrine, the indicators I recognized from Phantom 6 operational methodology, and my assessment of their next likely approach based on the pattern. That's more than I asked for. I know." She stood. "But if you're going to use it, I want it to be useful." He stood as well. He extended his hand. She looked at it for a moment. Then she shook it, briefly, no performance, the handshake of people who understand exactly what they've agreed to and what they haven't. The program you're building here, he said, the K-9 integration framework. Make it count. That's the plan, she said. She left. In the corridor outside, the post was settling into its evening rhythms, the change of watch, the mess hall noise, the distant sound of a training cadence somewhere on the far side of the compound. The ordinary sounds. The sounds that meant the machinery was running and the people inside it were still intact. She stopped in the corridor and stood still for a moment. Viper stopped with her. She thought about Hale's words, in a different category. She thought about Santos's face in the truck that morning, making jokes, and Santos's face in the canyon 10 minutes later, looking at the tourniquet on his arm and asking who she was. She thought about Pierce in the gravel of the motor pool, asking his real questions without flinching from the answers. She thought about the 11 days of working backward from a valley floor to a cash transaction at a supply store, the careful assembly of a picture from fragments, the way truth tends to accumulate slowly and then resolve suddenly, and how in all of that, the clearest moment had been the earliest one, before the explosions, before the casualties, before everything complicated and costly that followed. Viper, planted in the streambed, absolutely certain. She had trusted that certainty. And everything since, the survival, the investigation, the consultation, the program she was about to build, had followed from that single act of trust in what she knew to be true. She looked down at him. He looked up at her with those amber eyes that held no doubt about anything. "Come on," she said. They walked down the corridor together, and the evening closed around the post, and somewhere in a holding room a man named Pharaoh was learning what the cost of his choices looked like, and somewhere in a network that had been careful and patient for 14 months, someone was about to discover that patience has a shelf life. And in the motor pool and the briefing rooms and the training lanes of Fort Blackstone, something was beginning to change, slowly, the way real changes happen, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of smaller ones, each one building on the last, until the structure that results is strong enough to hold weight. Erin Cross was going to build something that lasted. She was reasonably certain it was going to be hard. She was also reasonably certain she was done pretending that hard was a reason not to start. The first training block ran on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Pharaoh was walked off post in flex cuffs. Erin had spent those 3 weeks building the curriculum from the ground up, which meant long evenings in the TOC conference room with a whiteboard and a laptop, and Viper asleep under the table, working through the architecture of something that had never quite existed in this form before. Not a K-9 manual. Those existed, were thorough, and were largely ignored by the operators who needed them most. Not a tactical guide for handlers. Those existed too, and suffered from the opposite problem. Written by handlers for handlers, with the assumption that the people reading them already understood why the dog's nose mattered more than a team leader's timeline. What she was building was something in between. A framework for two populations that had spent decades working adjacent to each other without ever quite learning to speak the same language. She had help. Pierce contributed the sniper's perspective, what aerial and long-range observation missed that a working dog's alert system caught. Hale, working from his corner chair with his leg elevated and his laptop balanced on a field manual, contributed the command perspective, what information a patrol leader needed from a handler to make an integrated go/no-go decision, and in what format, and at what point in the planning cycle. Callaway contributed resources and institutional friction reduction, which was less glamorous than the other contributions, and possibly more important. Santos contributed something she hadn't expected. He came to her office on the 4th day, a small room off the main corridor that had previously been used for equipment storage and still smelled faintly of gun oil and old cardboard, and he sat down across from her and said, "I want to help." She looked at him. "I know I'm not the obvious choice," he said. "I'm the guy who made jokes about the dog in the truck. I'm aware of that. I haven't forgotten." "I know you haven't." He shifted in the chair. "But here's the thing. I'm also the guy who thought he knew everything worth knowing about working with support elements, and I was wrong in a way that almost cost me my arm. If you're building something to change how operators think about K-9 integration," he paused, "you need someone who thought exactly the wrong things and can explain what changed and why. Someone who isn't already converted. someone who had to be convinced. She held that for a moment. "You're describing yourself as a case study," she said. "I'm describing myself as someone who might be more useful than I look." He held her gaze. "Which is, I understand, something you have some experience with." She looked at him for a long moment. "Can you write?" she said. "Well enough." "I need a section on operator skepticism, what the specific objections are, where they come from, why they feel valid to the person holding them, written from the inside." She paused. Not a confession, not a mea culpa, a genuine articulation of the mindset, so that the instructors teaching this material understand what they're working against. Santos was quiet for a moment. "I can do that," he said. "It has to be honest. If it reads like someone performing humility, it's useless." "Yeah." He looked at his arm in the sling. I don't think performing humility is going to be my problem." She hired him as a contributor, unofficially without paperwork, which was the only way to move quickly enough to matter. The first training block had 12 operators and 4 handlers. Erin ran it herself, which was deliberate. She could have delegated. She had enough material and enough support to hand the curriculum to someone else and oversee from a distance. But she had built this thing and she knew its weak points better than anyone, and the weak points were exactly where she needed to be. The session started at 0600 in the main training bay. Operators on one side, mess handlers and dogs on the other, the particular social geometry of 2 groups that don't quite know what to do with each other, which was exactly the problem the curriculum was designed to address, and which was therefore exactly where she chose to begin. She stood at the front with Viper at her heel and looked at the room for a moment. 12 operators, most of them young, most of them with that specific expression of people who have been voluntold to attend a training they're not convinced they need. 4 handlers with 4 dogs, a Malinois, 2 German Shepherds, and a Labrador whose name was Biscuit, and who was, despite the name, the most serious working dog on post. She said, "Viper is going to do something in the next 60 seconds. When he does it, I want everyone in this room to note your immediate reaction. Don't suppress it. Just note it." She looked at Viper. "Find," she said. He moved. He crossed the training bay in a systematic pattern, not random, a real search grid, covering the space methodically. The operators watched. Several of them shifted their posture slightly, the unconscious adjustment of people who are more engaged than they expected to be. Viper's nose dropped at the east wall, traveled 18 inches left, stopped. He sat. Perfect indication. No drama. "There's a training aid behind that panel," Erin said. 12 grams of training compound, double wrapped, placed there before you arrived. She paused. "Now, what was your reaction when he sat?" Silence. Then a young staff sergeant in the front row said, "Honestly, I thought, yeah, okay, the dog found it. So what?" "Good," she said. "That's the honest answer. Hold on to that reaction, because everything we're going to do for the next 6 hours is about understanding what's on the other side of it." She looked at the room. "The dog found a training aid. You know it's there because I told you it was there. In the valley, the dog finds something and nobody told you to expect it. And your reaction," she looked at the staff sergeant, "is still so what?" The staff sergeant had the grace to not look away. "The question this curriculum exists to answer," she said, "is what it would take to change that reaction. Not through authority or orders or policy, through understanding." She paused. "By the end of today, I want every operator in this room to be able to articulate specifically what the dog is actually telling you. Not what you think he's telling you, not what you assume he means, what he is actually communicating, in the behavioral language that handlers are trained to read and that operators have never been required to learn." She had their attention, not all of it, and not uniformly. There were 2 in the back who were still in the posture of people waiting for something to be over. But most of the room was leaning slightly forward, the way people lean when something is more interesting than they prepared themselves for it to be. "We'll start," she said, "with what Viper just did, and I'll tell you everything it means." The 6 hours went like this. Fast in some places, too slow in others, with the particular friction of any first run of new material. There were questions she hadn't anticipated, sections that ran long, One moment in the afternoon session where a disagreement between two of the operators and one of the handlers about alert reliability became heated enough that she had to intervene and redirect with a firmness that she kept carefully neutral. After, she sat in her equipment storage office with Viper and wrote 4 pages of notes on what needed to change before the next block. She did this after every session. It was unglamorous and it was necessary, and she had never been good at the particular failure mode of people who build something and then become too attached to the original version to see what's wrong with it. The sessions ran twice a week for 6 weeks. By the 3rd week, the social geometry of the training bay had changed. Not dramatically. Nobody was celebrating, nobody had had a conversion experience. But the operators and handlers had started arriving at roughly the same time instead of in separate clusters, and the conversations before the session started were no longer purely internal to each group. Small things, the kind that matter over time. Hale attended every session. He came on his crutches for the first 4, then on a cane, then without either. The nerve damage in his calf was improving, the physical therapist said, better than projected, though Hale walked with a very slight irregularity that she suspected was going to be permanent and that he was going to spend the rest of his career pretending not to notice. He sat in the back during sessions and never spoke unless she called on him directly, which was the correct instinct. The patrol leader who'd overridden the K-9 alert was both the most powerful cautionary example in the room and the one person who couldn't use that example himself without it reading as performance. She used it for him. Not by name, not by assignment. She described the decision architecture of the morning in the valley in clinical terms, the timeline, the alerts, the override decision, the outcome, and let the room draw its own conclusions. The operators in the training bay were military people. They understood how to read a case study. They understood what the patrol leader meant without being told who the patrol leader was. On the morning of the 4th week's first session, Hale stopped her in the corridor before the block started. "The case study," he said. "What about it?" "You could use my name." He held her gaze. "I've thought about it. I think it would be more honest." She looked at him. "It would also make the lesson about you specifically," she said. "And the lesson isn't about you specifically. It's about a decision pattern that any patrol leader could make, and has made, in multiple units across multiple postings." She paused. "If I name you, the operators in that room think about your choices. If I don't, they think about their own." He was quiet for a moment. "That's smarter than what I was suggesting," he said. "Most things are," she said, and kept walking. He almost laughed. She heard it behind her, that half sound, the shape of amusement without quite becoming it. She was deciding that she didn't entirely mind it. Well, the Pharaoh investigation concluded in the 5th week. The results came down through channels that Erin was not formally part of, which meant she heard them secondhand from Calloway, who called her into his office on a Thursday afternoon and told her in the same level way he told her most things. Pharaoh had been flipped in the 9th month of his assignment, as they'd suspected. The contact had been made through a mutual connection from a previous posting, someone Pharaoh had trusted, which was the usual mechanism. Networks that want inside access rarely approach strangers. They find the person who already has a relationship with someone they can use. The communication records from Pharaoh's personal device had unraveled a significant portion of the network's domestic contact structure. 4 additional individuals at 2 other installations had been identified and were under investigation. The financial trail that had disappeared into cash transactions had been partially reconstructed through the supply store surveillance and cross-referenced with communication metadata. Garrett's team had moved on 2 foreign contacts in the preceding week. "The network is damaged," Calloway said. "Not destroyed, but damaged significantly." "Pharaoh," she said, "cooperating, in exchange for considerations that are above my visibility level." He paused. "He's looking at serious time regardless." She nodded. She sat with it for a moment, the whole chain of it, from Viper frozen in the streambed to a man in federal custody cooperating with investigators who had more clearance than the people who'd originally caught him. "Your consultation document," Calloway said. "Garrett told me it was the most operationally useful external input they've received on this network." His words. "He's being generous. He's being accurate." Calloway looked at her steadily. He reached out again. "About the next phase." She had been expecting this. "What did you tell him?" she said. I told him that was your conversation to have. She looked at the photograph on his wall. The desert. The four figures. She had looked at it enough times now to have memorized it. The composition, the light, the way the four people stood with the particular ease of people who have been through something together and come out the other side of it intact. I'm going to finish the curriculum first, she said, the full 12-week version. I want it tested and revised and documented properly before I hand it to anyone else. That's 6 more weeks. Yes. And then? She looked at him. And then I'll have the conversation with Garrett, she said. Calloway nodded. He opened the next folder on his desk. Then, without looking up, for what it's worth, Cross, this post is better for what you've built here. Not just the curriculum. The way you've built it, who you've included, how you've run the sessions, the framework underneath it. He paused. That's going to last after you're gone. She stood. It better, she said. I wrote it in ink, Gates. The formal ceremony was Calloway's idea, and she had argued against it for 2 weeks before conceding that the argument was not really about the ceremony. It was a Thursday morning, 6 weeks later, on the main parade ground at Fort Blackstone. The day was clear and cold, the kind of cold that has color to it. Blue sky, sharp light, shadows with hard edges. The mountains that framed the base from the north were fully visible for the first time in weeks, the snow line lower than it had been in October, and the whole landscape had the particular clarity of a place that looks better when you can see it completely. The promotion was to Master Sergeant, backdated to account for the time in grade that her reassignment had technically interrupted. The formal language of the order described contributions to operational unit capability and development of integrated training doctrine. It did not describe the valley. It did not describe the secondary device or the drainage cut or the tourniquet on Hale's leg. Those things were in other documents, in a file that required different clearances to access, and that was where they belonged. Calloway read the citation. Hale, standing in his dress uniform with no visible brace and only a trace of the irregularity in his walk, pinned the rank. He did it correctly and without making it into something it wasn't. A ceremony is a ceremony, and she had never had much use for the performance of significance. But when he finished, when his hands came down and he stepped back, he held her gaze for a moment, and she held his, and something passed between them that was not about the ceremony at all. It was about the valley, the stream bed, the wire, the moment when the wrong decision intersected with the right person in the right place, and the outcome was not the outcome the wrong decision deserved. He nodded once. She nodded back. The team was assembled in the parking area after. Not formally. People just gathered the way people gather after a thing has happened, and nobody quite wants to be the first one to leave. Hale and Calloway and Pierce and Santos, who had his arm out of the sling now, and was eating something from a vending machine bag with the focus of a man who has spent too many weeks on restricted diet. 2 of the handlers from the training program were there, with their dogs. A few operators she recognized from the 3rd week session, the ones in the back who had started the morning skeptical and ended it taking notes. Pierce found her near the edge of the group. He stood beside her and looked at the mountains. The consultation, he said. I'm going in for 6 months, she said. Garrett's team, working the network's remaining structure from the analytical side. He was quiet for a moment. And after 6 months, he said, I'll see where things are. He turned to look at her. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have. She looked at the mountains. 6 months ago, I was a K-9 handler who thought she'd figured out what she wanted the rest of her life to look like. And then Viper stopped in a stream bed, and everything that came after, she paused. I don't think I get to have a clean answer right now. I think the clean answer comes later. That's fair, he said. She looked at him. You're good at this work, he said. What you've built here, the curriculum. He paused. You should know that. Not from anyone else telling you. You should just know it. Pierce. Yeah. You're better at watching than you are at encouragement. He almost smiled. I know. Stick to your strengths. He looked back at the mountains. Noted, he said. She found Santos later leaning against the far vehicle, bag of something salty in his good hand, looking at the parade ground with the expression of a man who is thinking about something and not quite sure what. She stopped beside him. He glanced at her. back at the parade ground. "The section I wrote," he said. "The operator skepticism section for the curriculum." "What about it?" "Did you use all of it?" "Most of it. Cut 2 paragraphs from the middle where you were explaining too much instead of showing. The rest was good." He nodded slowly. "Which 2 paragraphs?" "The ones where you tried to explain why the skepticism was wrong. The curriculum doesn't need to argue with the skepticism. It needs to let the evidence speak. You were editorializing." He was quiet for a moment. "That's fair." The rest held up, especially the part about the timeline pressure, how operators experience time cost of a halt differently than handlers do. That section is the most useful thing in the whole module. He looked at her. "Really?" "It's honest and specific, and it doesn't protect anyone," which is what that section needed to be. He was quiet for a moment. "I almost got out," he said, "when I was in medical. 11 days on that cot, I was seriously running the math on whether I wanted to keep doing this." She didn't say anything, just let him talk. "My arm's not 100%, he said. "Nerve stuff. Similar to Hale's leg, different location. The doctors say it'll improve, but there's a window." He flexed his hand slightly, looking at it. "Some days it's fine, some days it's not." "What did you decide? About getting out?" He thought about it. "I decided I wanted to see what happened next," he said. "Which is not like a profound answer, but it's the one I had." She looked at him. "That's a better answer than most," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "The truck," he said. "That morning, the jokes. I know I've apologized already. You have. I just want to say, it wasn't about you specifically. I didn't know you. I was talking about what I thought you were, not who you actually are. And that's..." He stopped. "That's its own kind of problem, isn't it? Talking about what you think someone is." "Yes," she said. "It is. I'm trying to get better at that." "I know," she said. "The section you wrote shows it." He looked at the bag in his hand like he'd forgotten it was there. "Viper doing okay?" he said. She looked over at where Viper was sitting beside Pierce, apparently tolerating Pierce's hand on his head with practiced patience. "He's fine," she said. "He's always fine." "Good dog," Santos said. "The best one I've ever worked with." "Does he know that?" She watched Viper remove himself from Pierce's vicinity with dignified efficiency and return to her heel. "Probably," she said. She left the group at 1400. Not from discomfort. The gathering had been fine, easy even, in the way that things become easy when the hard part has already happened and the people involved have mostly made their peace with it. She left because she wanted some time before the afternoon caught up with her, and because there was a place on the north edge of the training field that she had found in the first week and returned to regularly, which was the closest thing to a private space that Fort Blackstone offered. She sat in the short dead grass with her back against the fence post and Viper beside her and looked at the mountains. They were close today. The cold air did that, compressed the distance somehow, made things that were 40 miles away look like you could put your hand on them. She thought about the 6 months ahead, Garrett's team, the network's remaining structure, the work of pulling threads in a context where threads led to other threads, and the end of any of them was rarely as clean as you hoped going in. She was not naive about what 6 months was likely to be, or what it was likely to cost. She was also not naive about the alternative, which was to stay in the curriculum and the training blocks and the ordinary rhythms of a posting that she had grown genuinely fond of, and to let the network continue its careful, patient work in the world while she sat on the other side of it. She had tried that for 6 years. Viper put his chin on her knee. She looked down at him. He looked up at her with those amber eyes that held, as always, no ambiguity, just the direct and total communication of an animal that says exactly what it means because it knows no other way. She put her hand on his head. "We're going to be okay," she told him. His tail moved once, decisive. She believed him. Well, the curriculum was formally adopted by Post Command 3 days later. Callaway signed the implementation order, which required all operational elements to complete the 12-week integrated K-9 training program prior to assignment to medium to high threat patrol operations. and which established the K-9 alert protocol as a mandatory element of pre-mission planning for any element operating with a handler attached. It was 8 pages of policy language, and it would be complained about and worked around and imperfectly implemented, and it would also, eventually, become the way things were done, the invisible infrastructure of a standard that hadn't existed before and would be taken for granted by everyone who came after and never had to imagine the valley in the absence of it. That was how most important things worked. Erin had made her peace with that a long time ago. Pierce sent her the adoption notification with a one-line message. It's signed. You built something real. She read it once and deleted it and didn't respond, which Pierce understood as the response it was. Hale came to find her on the afternoon before she was scheduled to depart for the consultation assignment. She was in her office, still smelling of gun oil and cardboard. She had never quite fixed that, going through the last administrative transfer of the curriculum files to the handler who was taking over the training program in her absence. Hale knocked on the open door, and she looked up. He came in and sat down across from her. He didn't have the cane today, and he moved without it well enough that you had to be watching for the irregularity to see it. Tomorrow, he said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. You know what I've thought about most, he said, in the last 3 months. She waited. The moment between when my boot caught the wire and when the first rocket hit, he said. That fraction of a second. I've thought about it more than I've thought about anything else that happened that morning. He looked at his hands. Because in that fraction of a second, I had time to understand that something was about to happen that I had been warned about. Specifically, precisely warned about. And I had chosen to ignore the warning. She looked at him. That fraction of a second, he said. That's what this curriculum is for. That's the thing you've built, not a policy, not a protocol. He looked at her. The half-second pause where someone hears the dog and thinks, wait, and stops. She sat with that. That's what Viper does, she said. He provides the pause. The half-second that most people aren't willing to take on their own because stopping costs time and time feels like the enemy. She paused. He doesn't have that problem. He stops because the information requires it. He doesn't weigh the cost. We should be more like that, Hale said. Yes, she said. We should. He stood. He extended his hand. She stood and shook it. The handshake of 2 people who have been through the same fire from different angles and come out changed in ways they're still accounting for. Take care of yourself, he said. Out there. I will. And Cross. He paused at the door. Come back. She looked at him. The post needs the curriculum evaluated and revised at 6-month intervals, he said. I need someone who actually built the thing to do that evaluation. He held her gaze. So come back. She looked at him for a moment. I'll put it in the calendar, she said. She walked the training field one last time at dawn the next morning. The mountains were close again. The light was just arriving, that particular blue becoming gold quality of early morning that she had found over the course of 3 months to be the best time on post. Before the noise, before the machinery of the day engaged, before all the things that needed doing started competing for the available attention. Just the field and the fence and the mountains and Viper. He ranged ahead of her along the fence line, not working, just moving, the easy lope of an animal that is off duty and knows it. He disappeared around the curve of the fence, reappeared, circled back to her heel, kept pace for 20 meters, and then ranged ahead again. The pattern of it was familiar and specific, and she had never quite been able to articulate why it settled her the way it did. She stopped at the north end of the field where the fence post was, looked at the mountains, thought about the next 6 months, the network, Garrett's team, the work she knew how to do and had spent 6 years pretending she was finished with. Thought about the valley, the stream bed. Viper planted in the gravel, absolutely certain, while everyone around him had reasons to move forward, and not one of them had the clarity that he had. She had spent a long time trying to be something smaller than what she was. Not from weakness. She understood now that it hadn't been weakness. It had been a kind of grief. The specific grief of someone who had paid a high price for being good at a dangerous thing and needed time before they could be that thing again. The quiet posting. The dog. The ordinary sounds of a functioning place. She didn't regret any of it, but she understood now, standing at the north fence of Fort Blackstone with the mountains close and the dawn arriving and Viper at her side, that the time she'd needed was over. That what came next was not a return to what she'd been. She was not 28 anymore. The Phantom 6 program was gone, and 3 people who had gone into a denied area with her were not coming back. But something new. Something built from everything before it, carrying its weight honestly, moving forward with it, instead of around it. Viper sat beside her. She looked down at him. He looked up. "Ready?" she said. His tail moved. She turned south toward the motor pool and the vehicle that would take her to the airfield, and she walked with the particular quality of someone who has put down something they've been carrying for a long time and discovered that the walking is easier now. Not easy, never quite easy, but easier. And in the training bays of Fort Blackstone, in the sessions that would run twice a week through the winter and into the spring, operators and handlers would work through a curriculum built by a woman who understood both sides of the equation, who had been dismissed and doubted and ordered forward into a trap and had survived it, and then spent 3 months turning the survival into something that would outlast her. The half-second pause. The protocol. The framework that said, when the dog stops, you stop, you listen. You take the information that's being offered and you treat it with the seriousness that all honest information deserves, regardless of who or what is offering it. It was not a perfect system. No system is. But it was real, and it was there. And the first time it worked, the first patrol that halted on a dog's alert and found what the dog found and came home whole, nobody would know who had built the thing that saved them. That was fine. That was exactly fine. The strongest thing you can leave behind is not your name on something. It is the pause, the small, essential pause that you teach other people to take, the moment of listening before moving, the willingness to be still long enough for the truth to catch up. Viper had known that from the beginning. The rest of them were still learning. Well, the most dangerous thing on any team is not the enemy ahead. It is the assumption that you already understand everything you need to. The day you stop listening is the day the ground starts moving under your feet. And somewhere out there, a dog already knows what you don't. The question is whether you're willing to stop long enough to hear it.